Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another sermon from the Gardner Lane Church of Christ. I believe this is June the 7th, 2020. You get to the point where you become very confused after a while because of the fact of just doing sermons from week to week and then having to tape sermons ahead, then having to work on Bible classes that are a month or 2 months ahead right now, and everything is just starting to run together sometimes because of the fact just my memory isn't as good as it used to be. And a lot of people have that problem as well, to where their memory is not what it once was. I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one many times. A survey was done. Do you have trouble remembering different things? I think 83% of the people said, well, I have trouble remembering names. Other people said, well, I have trouble, I think 62% said, I have trouble remembering where something is. Or 53% have trouble remembering words, especially if you're a public speaker or do any public speaking at all. You can certainly understand that one with me about the fact of remembering words. One of the most fearful and tragic diseases that affects our lives many times is that of Alzheimer's disease. I think it's the fourth killer among adults in the U.S. today. Today I want to talk with you though about spiritual Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes Christians might have spiritual Alzheimer's disease. We forget things that are very important. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 5 says, they willfully forget. We spiritually become confused about who we are as Christians. Many times we become confused about where we live as Christians or who we belong to as Christians. Spiritual Alzheimer's disease, though, is 100% preventable, unlike physical Alzheimer's disease, and it's 100% curable. So we can thank God in that has occurred for us. Today, as we look at this, we're going to look at the symptoms of spiritual Alzheimer's disease. I think there's 5 points here, and the lesson will be yours today. One is the fact of gradual drifting in Hebrews and in chapter 2 and in verse 1. Hebrews chapter 2 and in verse 1, for this reason, we must pay closer attention to what we've heard so that we do not drift away from it. Some people are aware with Alzheimer's disease. My Aunt Cleta was one. She was aware when she was drifting in the beginning. She said, well, I'm not acting right here at this time. And she understood that she was drifting. Well, spiritually, many times we should know that we're drifting, especially when we become involved so many times in so many worldly things, or we love so many worldly things, and many times we just don't care for those spiritual things anymore. We also see in Hebrews chapter 3 and in verse 13, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it's still called today, so that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Maybe we notice somebody is drifting. One of the biggest problems, it seems like, in this pandemic that I've had to deal with is praying for people, concern for people that maybe they're drifting a little bit, and maybe their Bible studies have fallen off, and maybe they haven't been worshiping like they should. And that's a real concern at this time, especially in this pandemic. The second point, not only gradual drifting, but losing awareness of personal relationships. In Hosea, we'll look at Hosea a couple of times here. In Hosea chapter 2 and in verse 13, I will punish her for the days of the Baals. Baal means a husband or a master. When she used to offer sacrifices to them and adorn herself with her earrings and jewelry, and follow her lovers so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. And this was what was happening to spiritual Israel, that they were following somebody other than their true husband, the Lord. What a sad thing that would be. I just think about that in my own life. What a sad thing it would be if my wife didn't recognize who I was. Or maybe your spouse didn't recognize who you were. And how hard that is on people, especially the older they get, and how much they love the other one so much. I see this happening many times in nursing homes. In Hosea chapter 13 and verse 6 it says, and as they had their pasture, they became satisfied. And being satisfied, their heart became proud. Therefore, they forgot me. They were forgetting who was caring for them. In Hosea chapter 8 and in verse 14, it says, for Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces. Judah has multiplied fortified cities, and I will send fire on its cities, that it may consume its palatial dwellings. Israel had forgotten who created her. In Mark and in chapter 8, and in verses 16 through 19, it says, they began to discuss with one another the fact they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not see? Do you not understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000? Many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? And they said to him, well, it was 12 baskets. They weren't aware of the teaching of the Pharisees. They had soon forgotten that. They didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. But they were concerned about the fact, do you think we're going to have any trouble getting bread? And Jesus said, do you think I'm going to have any trouble getting bread? I fed 5,000. And then the next verse below that, he says, I fed 4,000. Do you really think I'm going to have trouble getting bread? In Psalm chapter 103, in verses 2 through 5, it said, bless the Lord, O my soul. Forget none of his benefits, who pardons your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with loving kindness and compassion, who satisfies your years with good things, so that your youth will be renewed like an eagle. We talk about benefits a lot of times when we go to work. What are my benefits going to be? Maybe it's going to be health care. Maybe it's going to be certain times of vacation, a 401k plan. Well, think about the benefits of the Lord and what he is able to accomplish for you. And a lot of people are doing this without thinking about God whatsoever. In Psalm 95, and in verses 6 and 7, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God. And we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice. So we see gradual drifting. We see losing an awareness of personal relationships. Maybe it's that of forgetting or confusing the facts. In Hosea and in chapter 4 and in verse 6 it says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. Many Christians forget many things they once knew. Maybe that of baptism. What do you need to do in order to be saved? They were able to rattle off several verses of scripture about what to do in order to be saved. Well, after a period of time, they're not able to do that anymore. In James chapter 1 and verse 25, but the one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides in it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. Well, we've seen thus far gradual drifting, losing awareness of personal relationships, forgetting or confusing the facts. Also, the problem with language. In Nehemiah chapter 13, it says, in those days I saw the Jews married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And as for their children, they spoke the language of Ashdod. And none of them were able to speak the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. Spiritual Alzheimer. People they're not able to speak God's language anymore. They'll use many times just profane language. In Colossians chapter 4 and in verse 6 it says, let your speech be always with grace, as though seasoned with salt, that you should respond to each person. Well, we see the gradual drifting, the losing of awareness, the forgetting and confusing the facts, problems with language, and the last thing, we forget who we are. A lot of times when you have physical Alzheimer, you don't even remember your name. And that's very sad. But of course, that can happen with spiritual Alzheimer as well. In 2 Peter chapter 1 and in verse 9 it says, for he who lacks these qualities is blind or short-sighted, having forgotten his purification from his former sins. He says in Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 11, this is our last verse for today, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes. We would encourage you to tune in again next week, and we look forward to being with you again at that time. And until next week, we hope that God continues to bless you.